Welcome to Decoding the Conflict Mindset, yet another exciting episode on workplace conflict and what it means to the health and well-being of organizations and the team that drives it. I'm so excited today as the founder and host of DCM, Dr. Deborah Dupree, to welcome our guest, attorney Flo DiBenedetto. I met Flo at our recent Mediator Essentials training program for attorneys seeking to transition to mediation, human resource professionals also seeking to do the same, as well as other interested individuals who might feel that mediation is the key, the tool to resolving conflict at the earliest level and even at more advanced complex levels. Flo was one of our participants, and very quickly I realized that she had a lot of insight into workplace organizations. Flo is an attorney, working many years as a litigator, but then also becoming general counsel to a major organization in Northern California, serving millions of people. And in the role of general counsel and making the transition to being part of the leadership development team, the C-suite, she realized that, even though a very experienced and very, very well-educated attorney, she wasn't quite prepared for the role that it took to be a leader of an organization. And that's why I was so delighted in meeting Flo earlier this year and better understanding her insights, her awarenesses about what she saw happening in organizations of today, particularly in the healthcare industry. So Flo is, like I said, a seasoned litigator, attorney, but also general counsel and on the C-suite of a major healthcare organization. So I can't wait to introduce you to Flo and our upcoming interview premiere on YouTube, and invite you all to join us, because there are some pearls of wisdom there that I am sure that you do not want to miss. And with that, I want to ask you to hold on. Meanwhile, invite your friends, colleagues, and your community to what Flo has to say about the challenges of today's leadership in so many ways, but also what drives conflict and what prevents engagement. You don't want to go away. So hold on, we will be there in moments. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the DCM podcast series, because we have some exciting guest speakers every month, not only on leadership concepts and so forth, but also managing medical conditions in the workplace. So do subscribe. There's lots of valuable information in what we have to offer you. I'm Dr. Deborah Dupree. We'll see you shortly. Well, welcome, folks. Here we are at Decoding the Conflict Mindset. And again, I'm your host and founder, Dr. Deborah Dupree, Decoding the Conflict Mindset. And I'm so delighted, for those of you who got here earlier, you've already heard me describe Flo DiBenedetto's background. But Flo, I first wanted to say welcome to you.
Thank you. It's good to be with you, Deborah.
Thank you. It's so nice to reconnect after a few months. And we did connect for sure, didn't we?
We did. It took a while and some technology problems, but we're here.
Yep, we're here today. Yep. And so, Flo, there's a few things I'd like to sort of prelude our listeners and viewers here today. And, first of all, they know your legal background and so forth. And, you share a passion like I do about organizational culture and leadership. And, I know we're going to tap into the say-do ratio. I'm fascinated to hear more about that. But let's start first with your story. How did you go from being an active counsel to what you're doing today, and why?
Yes, my story. Well, for 28 years, I was a pretty typical attorney doing both litigation and business work for most of my clients who were healthcare providers or in some way involved in the healthcare industry. So it was a pretty typical legal practice. You're a lawyer, you know what that means. But in 2008, I was invited to join Sutter Health, which is a large now a $20 billion enterprise in Northern California. It's an integrated healthcare delivery system. And I went into that organization as a senior vice president and a general counsel. And it was really my first opportunity to be a leader in a large, very complex, very important organization. Mm. And it was honestly, Deborah, my own lack of knowledge of what it took to be a true leader that began my journey into leadership development, into becoming a more effective leader myself, and in really developing a passion around helping others be more effective leaders. Because what happens, I think, in industries, not just healthcare, but all industries, is we take individuals who are good at their core competency. So I was a good lawyer. And then I was put into a senior vice president role. And at the time I joined Sutter, there was probably only 10 of us, and we all reported to the CEO. And it was the top level C-suite. Mm-hmm. It's a completely different skill set. Yeah. Completely different. And I didn't know that. I didn't understand that. I didn't realize that. And it took me a good 18 months to figure out that I was ill-suited to be a senior leader, despite having been, I think, a very solid lawyer. Mm-hmm. And so from that, I began to commit myself to self-improvement, to learning, to understanding. I ultimately was able to chair the Leadership Academy at Sutter, which is a 10-month program where we took the top 30 up-and-coming leaders in the company, and this is out of 55,000 employees, and we put them through a 10-month, essentially an executive MBA program. Okay. But it was all about leadership development, and it's kind of like a Top Gun. They were good leaders, but our job was to make them better. Mm-hmm. And in that experience, across all of the clients that I was privileged to represent, I found a real gap in leadership, in the values of leaders, in how they live those values or not, and the impact on the culture of the company, which in turn impacts its ability to achieve its strategic objectives. So that's a summary, I think, of my journey and my story and why I do what I do today.
Wow. Well, great. I really appreciate that, because we all have a story in terms of what influences, us to do what we do. And so in your situation, then it's really about, your experiences as an attorney and what you saw missing, as you transition, and then how do you go from here to there, and what's the next steps, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And when you go into a large corporation as the general counsel, I took very seriously that I had two titles, senior vice president and general counsel. And as a senior vice president sitting on the C-suite, reporting to the CEO, I felt and believed that I was every bit as responsible for the strategy of the organization, for the operational performance, and for the culture. I was never a general counsel that just stayed in the swim lane of legal.
Okay, great. So I want to share this with our viewers and listeners, because you said organizational culture is the single biggest factor in determining whether strategic objectives will be achieved. Leader behavior, not what the leader says, is the single biggest factor driving culture.
Correct.
There is a values and accountability gap in leadership today.
I think so.
Yeah. So then you went on to say the say-do ratio.
Yes.
In organizational leadership and how it impacts productivity and performance. So tell us more.
Well, I don't think I can take credit for the say-do ratio phrase, but I also can't tell you where I first saw it. But what it refers to is the gap between what leaders say their values are, what they claim their values are, versus how they actually behave every day in the workforce. Mm-hmm. And so we can break down and unpack what values effective and credible and accountable leaders have. And, I have my own list of what I think is important: honesty, integrity, transparency, compassion, humility, whatever they are. Mm-hmm. Do they actually live those values every single day in every single decision that they make? And in my experience, I learned quickly that the moment you claim to be honest or claim to be a person of integrity, and what is integrity? It's actually living your values. The moment you don't, you lose your credibility instantly. And so this gap between what leaders claim to be their values versus how they live every day in the workforce. That's the say-do ratio gap. And when employees see leaders who are not living the values they claim to have,
Mm-hmm.
whether they're berating employees when they claim to be compassionate, or whether they're not honestly being transparent with the workforce about things that are going on, employees see that. And that has actually what I would call a force multiplier impact on culture when that say-do ratio, when there's a gap there.
Yeah. So I think, another way of saying say do is when actions don't match words.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's one thing. Well, yeah, and I see this a lot when people, let's just take the whole area of self-development, for example, say, well, I've read all these books. It's like, good. But have you actualized them?
Mm-hmm.
Have you put them into action? I mean, it's one thing to know it up here. It's another thing to do it out there. And then the impact that you have on people too. And so I guess what I'm hearing you say is lacking is that they may know a lot, but they're certainly not demonstrating it through their behavior.
Yes, and I think there's a couple of possible reasons for that, because one of the things I do in my company now is I teach leadership development. I have a program where we go through a variety of different topics that we won't talk about right now. But sometimes leaders know what to do, but they don't know how to do it. And that's where the executive coaching piece that I do comes in. I have many clients now that went through the leadership development program, but they need, how do I really start this crucial conversation? How do I deal with this difficult employee? How do I challenge my boss on something? So they know what to do, but they don't know how to do it. But then honestly, Deborah, you just have leaders, and I'm sure we've all seen them, who project a certain image on stage, but in real life, they're very, very different in how they treat people, in how they run the company, in whether they're transparent. And as I say, the employees ultimately see that. And when employees see leaders not living their values, that's when you get into real cultural problems: lack of productivity, disengagement, low morale. When they see leaders not holding others accountable and just letting them get away with poor performance or bad behavior, that has a very detrimental impact. I think Colin Powell said that's like a virus that runs through an organization and destroys its will to win.
Yeah. You mentioned, Flo, a few of the the leadership values that impact organizational culture. So would you say those again, and then also expand a little bit? Like if there are 5 or 10, whatever they are.
Yes. And I think every leader probably has different ones. So I'll just share with you what over 40 plus years mine are. Certainly honesty, just telling the truth, and also not withholding material information when it should be given. So if you're presenting a project to a board and you tell the board is all the potential benefits of the project, but you don't tell them some of the risks of the project, including the material ones, that to me is not an honest presentation. Then we have integrity. And a lot of people think those two words are synonymous, and in my world, they're not. Integrity is actually doing what you say you're going to do every time. And I bring it back to living your values every single day in everything that you do. Accountability for yourself and others. Being able to hold yourself accountable takes self-discipline. Being able to hold others accountable takes courage and some compassion. Compassion is also, I think, an important part of being an effective leader. I think being vulnerable as a leader, being willing to open up to people about mistakes that you've made or challenges that you've had. In my own personal experience, I can share with you that when I first went to Sutter, because of my reputation in private practice, there were a number of people that were a little bit fearful of me coming into the organization because I was known as a pretty tough, direct lawyer. For me, I've always been very open about sharing my mistakes with my entire team because I want them, first of all, to know that I'm human too and I make mistakes, but also so that they can learn from them. I think vulnerability is really underrated by most leaders as an effective tool to influence people. And yet, and I read this somewhere too, Deborah, people don't want to see your resume. They want to see your humanity. That's how you connect with people. And that's how you really influence them. So I would say vulnerability, the ability to communicate clearly what your expectations are and what you expect of the employees. Because I've seen so many garbled communications or leaders who don't want to really put it out there that this is what we need to achieve, this is what I need you to do. And honestly, this is probably what will happen if you can't, meet my expectations. And when employees don't communicate clearly, that leads to confusion in the workforce. And then that confusion becomes discontent. And so I would say the ability to communicate clearly, and humility. Humility is important. Leadership is a privilege. It's privilege. It's not a right. It is a huge responsibility. And I was always humbled by and grateful for the opportunities that I had to be a part of the Sutter Health system, to lead my team, to be a part of the senior leadership. And I think humility is also a very underrated value in leadership today.
Yes. Yeah. Going back, because humility, those are oftentimes like humility, vulnerability, genuineness, transparency. Oftentimes those are viewed very differently and also viewed as weak. And yet vulnerability, being able to be vulnerable is a huge strength, just as with humility, as being, as you say, humble and just, okay, this is what I can do and this is where I didn't do, and I like what you said about courage.
Courage matters.
It matters big time.
Courage matters. Also, I read that somewhere, but it is so true because as a leader, you can have all the other values that we just ticked off, but if you don't have the courage to live them, not the rest of it doesn't matter. And I've worked with leaders who they were fine, wonderful people, and they had all those individual values themselves. But in one instance I'm thinking of in particular, this leader was just incapable of holding his team members accountable to those values. And so he treated people fairly and was very kind and all of those things. But his direct reports were not. And nothing, he just could not hold them accountable because he didn't have the courage to do that. And so when you don't have the courage, when you don't go into a leadership role and understand that it's hard, it's grueling, it's lonely, it's you're not going to make everyone happy all the time. When you don't have the courage to accept all of that, then it really doesn't matter if you have those values.
Yes. I'm reminded of I teach in a management training program for California State University, and I'm always amazed because one of the classes I teach is on coaching and feedback. And so when you talk about courage, I'm amazed how many people are fearful to tell an employee, where improvements needed. And so, there's some classic methods out there, but I've developed a couple of my own as far as, how best to approach people from a psychological perspective to make them open to hearing what you have to say, and get away from constructive criticism. There's no such thing as constructive criticism. Criticism is criticism.
Right.
Blanket. And nobody likes to be criticized. So feedback forward. Here's what happened and how do we make it better next time? And so really feeding that forward. And so that goes back to that courage, and then holding responsibility, holding accountability in there too.
Right. But I would also say, I think I mentioned compassion. And I was speaking somewhere and someone in the audience said, well, and we talked about accountability. And the question was, well, you said it's important to be compassionate, but then you hold people accountable. How do those two interact?
Good question.
Well, it is, except that in my view, when we don't give honest feedback to employees, when we say we value them, but we don't care enough about them to give them their areas of opportunity or whatever you want to call them, that does a huge disservice to them because you're depriving them of the opportunity to understand what they need to do better in the future. And I think it shows a lack of compassion, really.
Yeah.
It's not the fact of holding someone accountable, and that probably is a pejorative term too. So whatever we want to call it, but when you don't advise employees that they've not met the grade in one way, shape, or form, and here's maybe how you can do better in the future, you do them a real disservice.
Mhm.
And you don't give them the opportunity to improve. And to me, that's in a way saying you don't care enough about them. To be
Yeah.
honest with them, it's not the message necessarily. It's the messaging. It's
Yeah.
how you deliver it.
Hmm.
So instead of saying something my father used to say all the time, which was, "What were you thinking?" How about, "Can you help me understand
Yeah.
why you did it this way? And did you
Mhm.
think about, or would you think about doing it that way?" It's messaging.
Yes, it is. And I
You're a
like to add
mediator,
to
so
that.
you know that.
Yeah, well, I like to add to that. Well, how's that working for you? And then let's talk about what worked and what didn't work, because what didn't work are opportunities to make it better, make it different. And what worked, let's keep doing it.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. In my work across my entire career, but certainly when I was in a corporation, oftentimes a decision was made to let someone go. And it could be
Mhm.
someone at the highest levels in the organization. And we go back and we look at their performance reviews, and there's never a word in the performance reviews about any of the issues that are now being used to want to exit this individual.
Mhm.
So unfair.
Yes,
So,
very
so
unfair, because that doesn't help people grow. It helps them stay stuck. And
correct.
so then that leads into Flo, how these kinds of characteristics and values of a leader impact the culture. Because now we just started talking about the impact on employees and how we're
Hmm.
really depriving them of
Yes,
opportunities to
yes.
grow. They see it. They're not dumb. They see what's
Oh,
going
yeah.
on. They can read between the lines. And so how does that turn up in culture?
Well, I think it depends on how you define culture too. And there's probably every leadership book on the shelves today has some definition of culture. But the one that resonates with me, and I can't claim credit for this either, is it's the observable behaviors in an
Mhm.
organization that really are a direct reflection of the leader's values. So if you want to assess culture in a company, I think the way you do it is you just go in and you start listening and you start watching.
Mhm.
Are people treating each other with civility and respect? Are people treating external consultants and vendors the same way? Do
Mhm.
you get a sense that people enjoy what they're doing? They're happy. They're willing to help one another. There's none of this, "It's not my job," or "I'm not on that team." You can feel it when you go in.
Mhm.
And in my experience, the single biggest impact on that organizational culture, on the employees, is what they see and what they feel and what they observe from leaders.
Mhm.
So when they have leaders who are honest, who uh, hold themselves and others accountable, who are clear in their communications, who treat people with compassion, who make tough decisions, that I think is what truly energizes the employees and makes them want to be part of a high producing team.
Mhm.
And so, again, it comes down to how you define culture, but to me, it's the observable behaviors when you walk into a company that the employees are exhibiting. And the
Yeah.
biggest single factor on that is leader values. And in
Mhm.
turn, culture, and again, this is not my phrase, but culture is the engine that drives the company.
Yeah.
It will
I like that.
derail your strategy every day of the week. We've all heard that culture eats strategy.
Yeah.
It's true. Strategy fails for one of two reasons, I think. The first one is you haven't defined the problem properly,
Yeah.
so your solutions aren't effective. And we can really dive into that maybe another time because that gets into diversity of thought and objective analysis. But the other thing that typically derails strategy is culture.
Mhm.
Let me give you an example. When you are part of an organization and you let employees get away with not doing what they're supposed to do,
Mhm.
I call it the opt out culture.
Oh,
You
I like that.
allow employees or subsidiary corporations or whatever to decide, yeah, well, the system office told us we have to do this, but that's not how we do things here.
Mhm.
And we let that slide.
Mhm.
That opt out culture will eat your strategy every day of the week.
Yeah. You mentioned, I really like that opt-out kind of thing. And you mentioned earlier that you can feel the atmosphere or the culture of an organization just walking in.
Mhm.
And no name spoken, but I remember being called into an organization to consult, and I had never quite felt it so omnipresent. I walked in, it was like, whoa. I mean, the tension, you could just feel it. Nobody was even around except the receptionist, but it was just like, ooh, this just doesn't feel good at all. You
Right.
could feel the energy or
Right.
the negative energy. It was really, really impactful. I never quite experienced it that strong before.
Yeah. The receptionist probably didn't greet you, or if she did, it was in a kind of a nasty tone of voice, like you were bothering her. And then you contrast that with getting on, say, a Southwest flight, when
Yeah.
the flight attendants are always joking around, they're welcoming you, they're engaging with you, they're funny.
Mhm.
It's palpable.
Very much, very much, very much. Yes. And so, and I'm so glad that you brought up this term, in our preview, and I want you to expound upon it because I use the word a lot, or the two words a lot too. But we just talked about tension and feeling the culture and that opt-out culture. What's your meaning of psychological safety?
Well, let me start by saying that I think most people, or a lot of people, I should say, think of psychological safety as the ability to be honest and give candid feedback to superiors, to tell them about your concerns. Psychological safety, we all talk about, and it's true, is essential to have a candid environment, meaning where people can be candid with one another and share their views about projects or concerns or whatever it is. So to some degree, it's defined as the ability to speak up
Mhm.
and be honest about what you think about a project or what you feel about a case or whatever it might be. I think there's a deeper meaning to it though, because just to leave it there,
Mhm.
that means you're expecting your employees to speak up immediately if they see something when maybe you've never communicated with them before on anything. They never see you. They don't know anything about you as a leader. People
Mhm.
are not going to follow you as a leader unless they really know you and trust you.
Mhm.
And that is built up over time. So for me, psychological safety has a broader, I view it with a wider lens,
Okay.
and it has to be built with intentionality. So for me personally, when I was leading my department at Sutter, I
Mhm.
had at one time about 360 people in my department. I met every week with them. Uh, Either, it was a combination of in person and on Zoom or somehow on the phone because they were, of course, spread out over our geographic footprint. But I met every week with them to tell them what was going on in the system, what we were focused on, what we needed to do in the department. For those employees that were housed where I could get to them, either in the corporate office or out in the hospitals, I would make a point of rounding with them regularly. Just stop and talk to them. They want, as I said earlier, they want to see your humanity. They want to see that you care about them.
Mhm.
And then again, getting back to the whole leaders living their values, and I was very clear. I say
Mhm.
what I mean, and I mean what I say.
Yeah.
And I think I was a very compassionate leader, but people also knew I meant what I said. And
Mhm.
sometimes I even had to say, guys, this isn't a suggestion.
Yeah. Yeah.
So psychological safety is crucial to having the kind of functional team. You probably have read Patrick Lencioni's book, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the classic work on the lack of psychological safety in a team, where people don't feel that they can actually give candid feedback because they might be berated or they might be shunned. In fact, I have a great book I would recommend to you and to your audience called Willful
Please.
Blindness. It's a book written by Margaret Heffernan of Willful Blindness, and it's all about how people would rather be wrong than be alone. And so rather than speaking up and maybe bucking what the majority wants to do, and I've experienced this in my career where I've challenged projects or cases or how we were going to handle something, and the business owner who was advocating for it got really annoyed with me.
Hmm.
And in one instance, just shut his camera down and went off Zoom. He took it very personally that I would challenge, like, are we really ready to do this? Because I have concerns about our infrastructure and whether we're really designed to be able to accomplish what we want to accomplish. I think we need to do a few other things first. Took it very personally. Of course, I did that, but a number of people won't. They'd be
Mhm.
thinking it, Deborah, but they don't want to be shunned like that. They don't want
Yeah,
to be ostracized. People want to be part of a pack.
yeah,
And so this book, Willful Blindness, is all about that dynamic and
mm,
how society and societal influence is so strong that people would rather either be quiet or just be wrong and espouse a wrong position rather than be shunned and be
right.
ostracized.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think psychological safety it's very complicated and it's much more than the ability to speak up. But that's where we hear about it most because the employees are the eyes and ears in any organization. They will see and hear more than any leader or any governing board ever will. You
Mhm.
want them to speak up and you need to listen as a
Yeah,
leader. The phrase is really speak up and listen. It's not just speak up. We need to listen and
mhm, mhm.
we need to practice the art of humble inquiry.
Like
Help
that.
me understand this
Mhm.
and truly be engaged in what the employees are trying to tell you. That's normally all they want, in my experience, is to be heard
Yeah.
and to be heard and have their views considered. There were
Mhm.
many times when I had to go back to an employee and say, I really appreciate your views. I have thought about it carefully. I'm still going to go down this path, and this is why.
Mhm.
And I don't remember an instance where I had a real problem with that. As long
Mhm.
as I gave them that feedback loop and they understood that yes, I heard them, but I'm still
Mhm.
doing it this way and this is why.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what I'm hearing in what you say, Flo, is a number of things, but one of them is just the genuineness. Like you said, you say what you mean and you mean what you say. And so that's genuineness, authenticity, whatever you want to call it, but it's also an accountability. You're holding yourself accountable to deliver through on your message. And
Yes.
you're showing that in your actions. And that's where I see a lot of people losing faith, losing trust in their leaders because like we said earlier, say one thing, but then go off and do something else and be counterproductive to the very values you say you espouse. It's like a
Yes.
mission statement. It's like, I was what does your mission statement say? And so they might know it. It's like, well, how does that show up in your organization?
Mhm.
What behaviors actually support that? It's like, oh, okay,
Yes.
yeah, we can say it, but that's another way of, as I mentioned earlier, we're not actualizing it.
Correct. And then you also have the problem in organizations of double standards.
Yeah.
So, for example, if we had a very firm rule that we were not allowed to leave our computers in our cars
Mm-hmm.
because of the risk of them being stolen. And if we did, it was a terminable event. And
Mm-hmm.
we had people that were terminated for doing that. But there was sometimes a challenge if it was maybe a leader in the company who had done that as opposed to a rank and file member. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that can really create some real challenges when there are one set of rules that apply, but when those rules might change depending on who's involved.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
Yeah.
sure that's true in any organization, but the employees also see that.
Yeah, yeah. I want to share a quick example because it still stands out in my mind. It probably goes back 15 or 20 years, but I was working with a fairly significant power and water utility for quite a long time in certain kinds of consulting. And so, being around for actually almost 18 years, the supervisors and managers really got to know and trust me. And so they started to come to me with concerns or challenges with their employees that was actually outside of my primary role. But
Hmm.
wanting to be helpful and so forth. And human resources did support them approaching me. Well, let's go talk to Deborah. And so several supervisors in the sort of fleet department came to me because their field workers then, of course, all had cars or vehicles that they would have to take out into the service area. Their service area was huge, and it was in the desert. And so they came to me because we just do not know how to deal with this because we keep having employees that even though their job description says, check your vehicle, check the fluids and check the air, all this stuff before you ever leave the yard, then suddenly we're having to go out with our big tow truck and 2 other people to go out and retrieve them some 60, 90 miles away in the desert, and that's not fun in the hot heat of summer when it's 120,
Right.
And so I thought about it, and I asked for a few examples, and I said, well, I take it you all have, company vehicles also, right? And so, you have a morning meeting, right? So everybody knows where they're going and blah, blah, blah. Yes. It's like, okay. And so then do you get in your cars and drive away? Yes. So is your vehicle check part of your job? And do you do that? And they all said,
Exactly.
no. It's like, well, right there, you're demonstrating behavior that's not consistent. Why should they do it if you don't do it? And yet you all have company vehicles. It's like, oh my God. So they made a very explicit, demonstration of always doing that and change it all around very quickly.
Exactly. And that proves my point. It's leader behavior that influences the organization and has a force multiplier effect on it.
Yeah.
Even something really simple like, this is a pet peeve of mine, but so many executives would dump their coffee cup in the sink and expect somebody else to put it in the dish. It's like, pick up your cup and put it. And when employees see me doing that and cleaning up my own mess in the conference room and not expecting my executive assistant to do that, that sends a powerful message. And most employees want to emulate a leader that they admire and respect.
Yeah. That reminds me, Flo, it's just something as simple as that can have a huge, powerful multiplying effect, even like washing your coffee cup. Right. And so if people just keep awareness that it's oftentimes in these small things that may seem insignificant, but again, all eyes are on you when you're the leader.
Yes.
So even the smallest indiscretion, like leaving a coffee cup in the sink for somebody else to clean up, is like, look how much they respect us. They expect us to clean up their messes, and that goes on.
To me, it was a sign of disrespect for me to do that, and I would never do it. I mean, thank God I was raised by parents that would never let me get away with it either. But I think Colin Powell said something like this too, Deborah. If you don't get the small things right, you can't be trusted to get the big things right.
Right.
Small things matter.
Small things matter. Yep. Yeah. Well, they always say, don't sweat the small stuff. And that's true. Don't get upset and anxious about the small stuff. But the devil's in the details. It's that small stuff that matters.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So, this has been really rich, and I thank you so much for this opportunity, Flo. We talked about accountability earlier, and we talked about the values and what's lacking. What would you say is maybe the major single factor or 2 or 3 factors that really account for the lack of accountability in leadership? Do you see some patterns there that people can be aware of and say, okay, how can I show up with being more accountable?
Well, again, I think accountability has two components to it. It's holding ourselves accountable to what we claim to be important, including the honesty piece and owning your mistakes, not trying to hide them or lie about them or whatever, and then consistently holding others accountable in a compassionate way. But the question you ask is why are we so challenged to do that? Yeah. I think, again, part of it is just a lack of fundamental understanding of how important that is in the workplace as a leader and the impact it has on your employees. A lack of understanding of what it creates in their minds, that if you're not holding yourself accountable, then why should they hold themselves accountable? There's a great book out there by Cy Wakeman called No Ego, and it's all about, we spend so much money on employee engagement strategies and tactics, and how can we make our employees happy? And the premise of her book, and I agree with it, is personal accountability is the key to engagement. People holding themselves accountable and being held accountable is the key to engagement. So I think there are some other reasons why accountability is challenging. We are living in a society today, in a generation today. It's very different than the world I grew up in and probably the world you grew up in. We weren't allowed to be not accountable.
Yeah.
And, I hate to be a bit of a downer, but I have seen over the course of my career now, the generations that are coming up behind us, and there's a me first and a kind of an entitled to attitude.
Mhm.
And I think there's a lack of accountability actually in the family unit today. And that was never existing when I was raised by any means. When I got in trouble in school, I got in far worse trouble at home. But as silly as that sounds, that translates into your employment setting as well.
Yeah.
And people are not used to being held accountable, and they object to it. And there's kind of a sense of kind of blame shifting. It's somebody else's fault. If I'm not successful, it's somebody else's fault. So I do think it's multifactorial. But at the leader level, I think there's just a fundamental lack of understanding of how important that is. And as we talked about earlier, it's hard. It's hard.
It's a position of wearing many hats.
Yes.
You're not only a leader, but sometimes you're a parent, and sometimes you're a coach, sometimes you're a mentor, sometimes you're the decision maker, sometimes you need to let others make the decision, and so it is one of multiple hats that really needs cultivation and demands cultivation.
Yeah.
And that ongoing growth mindset.
And it demands clear communication too. If employees don't understand what they're supposed to be doing because the leader hasn't been clear, then it's hard to hold the employees accountable because you haven't been clear. So that confusion that begins to trickle through the workforce, because at the top, say the leaders are not aligned at the top. That has another major impact on culture, Deborah, when you've got senior leaders that are not aligned and working together towards whatever the overall objective of the company is. But they're pursuing their own individual agendas, and people are working in silos. And all that creates is the people below them on their respective teams are fighting with each other, which results in conflict, and then they have to call you.
Yeah.
So it is multifactorial, this whole issue of accountability, and I think there's a lot of reasons why it's so hard and it is so absent in many organizations today.
Yeah. Well, this has been fascinating, and I know we have many more things to talk about, so we'll talk about coming back to be on the show because I know there's a lot of depth to what you bring to the table. And but I'd like to end on a little fun note here is that you and I share a passion for animals, and I know that you're very active in animal rescue and as well as veterans and first responders, and so we have that connection. And so anything you want to add to about that?
Well, I have a sign in my home office that says something to the effect of, the more I know people, the more I like dogs. And I don't know why this is, because as a child, we were never allowed to have a dog. I got my first dog when I was 30 years old, but I have a very, I think, unique and profound connection to all animals and to dogs in particular. To the degree where, I'm sorry to say this, but I might often drive by a human accident and just kind of glance over. If a dog is involved, I'm out of the car.
Wow.
Here in California, we have a big homeless problem, but if there's a dog attached to a homeless person, my wallet comes flying out of my.
Wow.
It's just a very profound connection that I have, particularly with dogs, but with all animals. They are God's creatures, and it's my privilege to be able to help them financially. And sometimes I have the opportunity to fly them for medical care or treatment or foster. And it's going to be a big part of my future non-working life, I think.
Okay. Well, that leads to the second one is that you are a commercial pilot and you have 3 instructor ratings. So kudos to you. I started flying and then life happened and I never got back to it, but I've always been amazed at people who fly. So, but a commercial pilot's license, that's really phenomenal.
Well, to be clear, I can fly passengers and cargo for hire. I don't fly for the airlines. The highest level of a pilot's rating is an airline transport pilot certificate. I don't have that because I went through flight school when I was in my late 40s and early 50s. So I knew I was not going to make a career in the airlines. But yes, I can fly people and cargo for hire, and it is a higher
Wow.
rating. But what I really enjoyed for a while was teaching people how to fly. Although I'll
Mm.
tell you, they're all trying to kill you. So you got to be careful with that. And it's never too late, Deborah. If you're interested in flying, it is never too late to learn.
Well, I might take you up on that. I have to remember I learned to fly in San Diego, and I still didn't do solo, but my highest level I got was with the instructor, and we flew out. We got around the San Diego airport, and flew out over the ocean, and it was just like I just achieved what I wanted to do, as far as just flying, and landing it properly and all that kind of stuff. But it was winter, and then days got short, and just never got back to it. So yeah,
Well, life
yeah.
takes over, and it's something that you have to really work at, obviously, and keep up.
Mm.
It's not good to get in an airplane once every 4 or 5 months and expect to be safe.
No. Yeah, yeah.
It's
You got to
not
keep
cheap.
that up. Got to
Yes,
keep that up. Yep, yep.
correct.
And the last thing, you are an extreme downhill skier. So say more about that.
Well, I started skiing when I was 30 years old, and again, it's almost like the connection with dogs. Being in the mountains, in the snow, on skis is just my peaceful place. I spent a lot of time as a young person on ice skates, and so that those skills transferred pretty quickly, and I became a pretty decent skier pretty quickly especially for learning as an adult. I'm not as extreme as I used to be, but I've always been challenged by
Mm.
danger. I'm somebody
Yeah.
that my friends will say I'm addicted to danger. And
Ooh.
to some degree, that's true. I just love to challenge myself physically and
Mhm.
mentally, whether it's in
Mhm.
an airplane or staring down the slope of a
Mhm.
nearly vertical mountain and figure out how am I going to get down this safely.
Mhm.
And so that's my only excuse for it is I'm sure I have an element of craziness in me, but I want to do it as long as I can do it and be
Yeah.
safe while doing it. I don't take undue risk. My risks are very calculated, but if I think I can, and a lot of it is up here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most skiers have the skill to do it, but they get stuck because of fear. And I've always been someone who does not want to be controlled by fear. I want to overcome my fear. So that's really what it's about.
Yeah. Well, in listening to you, I can see where all three of these avid interest areas of yours has helped create the kind of lawyer that you were when you were actively practicing in the legal arena, but also how it drives your leadership perspective. And it sounds like your whole Sutter experience was quite a learning experience as well, and
It
made you who
was.
you are today.
Indeed, and I'm very grateful for it. It was a privilege to be part of that organization that serves 3 million patients. Really, the greatest privilege of my professional career.
Well, great. Well, Flo, it's been absolutely delightful to have you here today on Decoding the Conflict Mindset, and a lot of layers in there, and we'll come back to explore. So thank
I
you
look
again for
forward to it.
being here.
My
Okay.
pleasure, my privilege. Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our listeners and viewers joining us here today. If you enjoyed what you heard, please follow up with Flo. And Flo, how can they reach you?
Well, you can find me at F DiBenedetto at DiBenedettoSolutions.com, and I'd be happy to get your email and respond.
Very good. And we'll make sure we get your email address into our show notes that will go up on YouTube. Okay. And
Excellent.
great, great. And, and again, if you liked what you heard today, please pass it on, share it, maybe share it with leaders in your organization. Might be a wake up call, and reach out and get some help. So again, Dr. Deborah Dupree, founder and host, Decoding the Conflict Mindset. Well, thank you for being part of the DCM community worldwide as we bring to you different perspectives, fresh insights about how we manage conflict. Really, it's about reframing, not reflaming. That's another whole story in itself, but reframing how we look at conflict. And that's the key to resolving conflict effectively, early, and with long-standing sustainability. So I'd like to just emphasize a few key points of what Flo DiBenedetto has had to share with us in her interview. In that, I love her saying, culture is the engine that fuels the organization. So why do we put so much emphasis on culture? Because that's it. Without an engine without fuel, like a gasoline engine or a diesel engine. If we don't have gas or diesel fuel in it, it's not going to go anywhere. And that's what we're dealing with in the organization. People are what drive organizations. I also like what she had to say as far as, how the culture, depending on how you define it, can derail the success of an organization, and that there's an opting out. And particularly when employees see leaders not adhering or upholding the very stated values that they say that they hold or abide by the organization's mission statement, the evidence is astounding and abounding. And then, she added, another layer of what we call psychological safety. And not only the ability to be candid, but also it goes beyond, what'd she say, intentionality. Intentionality with being able to speak up and be heard, be listened to, not being shut down and criticized, without fear of retribution or retaliation. Another thing that she had to say she brought up Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of the team and how that totally is the antithesis of psychological safety. And she brought a couple of resources I thought were very valuable. I wanted to reiterate here. Willful blindness, look it up, and then also no ego. And so there we have it, from Flo DiBenedetto, an experienced attorney, in-house general counsel, and she's seen it from both sides, litigation as well as communication and internal mediation processes. She's mediated her way through many challenging situations in a major healthcare organization. Could you use her? Maybe so. Definitely worth reaching out to her. So check the show notes below and you will find her contact information if you want to learn more. And I'm also excited to bring to you yet another phenomenal person, Anna Sambold. Anna is again a renowned, internationally acclaimed attorney and dispute resolution enthusiast. She just stepped down from her ABA, American Bar Association, dispute resolution presidency, and we had the best conference ever in 2024. And she travels internationally and is international and brings to us so many perspectives. I can't wait for her to come aboard and share with you what's happening in the state of California when it comes to certification of mediators, a long challenge event that we've been waiting for many years. So look at how you view mediation. And it's not just an event, it's an opportunity to reframe, rethink, and reorganize how we approach conflict. Conflict is not something to be afraid of, it's something to embrace, because conflict actually represents opportunity. Something is not working. As I always say, how's that working for you? Not. Okay, so let's take a look at what's working and what's not working. And that's what mediation and dispute resolution has to offer all of you in organizations, C-suite levels, legal counsel, employees at every level. So please come back. Don't miss out our March episode with Anna Sambold. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being part of the DCM community, changing conflict one conversation at a time. I'm Dr. Deborah Dupree, the Mindset Doc, seeking to influence worlds and minds all over